How important was the role of blacks during the Civil War in the United States? Imagine the weight carried by those who were born into bondage, denied the very essence of their humanity, and yet who dared to dream of a life beyond chains. For many enslaved individuals, the Civil War was not just a distant conflict but a deeply personal battle for their liberation and dignity. As Union troops advanced into the South, enslaved people fled their captors, often at great risk, seeking refuge behind Union lines. These courageous men, women, and children, who had lived lives of forced labor and degradation, seized the chance to become contraband of war. Yet their humanity shone brighter than their label. They labored tirelessly, building fortifications, sewing uniforms, cooking meals, and supporting the Union cause in ways that would never fully be acknowledged in history books. These individuals weren't just escaping slavery, they were dismantling it piece by piece. For those who enlisted in the Union Army, wearing the uniform meant more than just fighting for the preservation of the United States, it symbolized a declaration of self-worth and equality. Enlisting required extraordinary bravery. They knew that if captured by Confederate forces, they would not be treated as prisoners of war but would likely face execution or a return to slavery. But still, they fought. They fought with unrelenting determination, their actions speaking louder than the prejudice that sought to devalue them. The 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, immortalized for its valor, epitomized this spirit. Against overwhelming odds, they charged Confederate defenses at Fort Wagner, proving beyond doubt that black soldiers were every bit as courageous and capable as their white counterparts. Their sacrifice inspired not only Union soldiers but also abolitionists across the nation, further galvanizing support for the cause of freedom. The contributions of black women cannot be overlooked. Many served as nurses, cooks, and laundresses, tending to wounded soldiers and keeping the machinery of war moving. Others acted as spies and scouts, risking their lives to gather intelligence for Union forces. Women like Harriet Tubman, already a legendary figure in the fight against slavery, became even more formidable as she led daring raids to free hundreds of enslaved people. These women were not passive witnesses to history, they were architects of it. The war transformed not only the nation but also the identity of those who fought in it. For Black Americans, the Civil War was not just a moment in time but a crucible that forged a new path forward. Through their blood, sweat, and unyielding resolve, they claimed their rightful place in the American story. They forced the nation to confront its hypocrisy, to reconcile its founding ideals of liberty and equality with the brutal reality of slavery. Yet, the end of the war was not the end of their struggle. The promises of freedom and equality were fragile and, in many cases, fleeting. The Reconstruction era brought hope but also heartbreak as systemic racism and violence sought to suppress the hard-won progress. Still, the legacy of Black Americans in the Civil War endured, a beacon lighting the way for future generations to continue the fight for justice. The role of Black Americans during the Civil War was both pivotal and transformative, shaping the outcome of the war and the broader struggle for freedom and equality in the United States. Their contributions were multifaceted and included military, economic, and social impacts. Here are some key aspects of their importance. Number 1. Military contributions. Enlistment in the Union Army and Navy. Over 200,000 black men served in the Union Army and Navy, with approximately 180,000 in the Army and 20,000 in the Navy. These soldiers made up about 10% of the Union's forces by the end of the war. U.S. Colored Troops, USCT. The establishment of the USCT allowed black soldiers to fight for their freedom and the Union. Though often assigned to labor-intensive roles, many units, such as the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, gained fame for their bravery in combat, including their heroic assault on Fort Wagner in South Carolina. Black soldiers faced higher risks, including harsher treatment if captured by Confederate forces, but they fought valiantly, with many earning honors for their service. Number 2. Economic impact. Labor force disruption. Enslaved people in the South played a critical role in the Confederate economy by working on plantations, building fortifications, and supporting the war effort. As Union forces advanced, many enslaved individuals fled to Union lines, undermining the Confederate labor system. Contraband camps, escaped enslaved individuals, referred to as contrabands, provided labor for the Union, building infrastructure, working as cooks, nurses, and performing other essential tasks for the war effort. Number 3. Social and political impact. Undermining slavery, Black Americans' participation in the war accelerated the collapse of slavery. Many enslaved individuals took active steps to sabotage the Confederate economy and aid the Union cause, such as escaping, spreading information, or organizing resistance. Abolition momentum. The bravery and dedication of Black soldiers strengthened the abolitionist movement and influenced President Abraham Lincoln's decision to issue the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, which declared freedom for enslaved people in Confederate-held territories. Advocacy for citizenship and rights. Black soldiers and their allies argued that their sacrifices deserved recognition in the form of citizenship and equality. This laid the groundwork for post-war amendments to the Constitution, including the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, the 14th Amendment, granting citizenship, and the 15th Amendment, ensuring voting rights for Black men. Number 4. Challenges and discrimination. Despite their immense contributions, Black soldiers and civilians faced significant discrimination during the war. They were often paid less than white soldiers, relegated to menial tasks, and led by white officers. However, their perseverance and dedication helped challenge these injustices and demonstrated their capability and commitment to the Union cause. To reflect on the role of Black Americans in the Civil War is to honor the immeasurable sacrifices they made, not only for themselves but for the soul of the nation. It is to acknowledge their role in transforming the United States from a land of contradictions into a land striving for its highest ideals. Their struggle reminds us that freedom is not a gift bestowed by the powerful but a right earned and defended by the courageous. They proved that the fight for justice requires not just strength of arms but strength of spirit, a refusal to yield even in the face of hatred and oppression. Their story is not just a chapter in history, it is a call to action, a reminder that the fight for equality and justice is ongoing. To truly honor their legacy, we must carry their torch forward, ensuring that the sacrifices of those who fought for freedom were not made in vain. Their courage lives on in every act of resistance, every march for justice, and every demand for a better future. They remind us that even in the darkest hours, the light of hope and determination can guide us toward a brighter tomorrow. The sacrifices of Black Americans during the Civil War cannot be measured in statistics alone. Behind every number was a person, a soul who dared to hope, to dream, and to fight for a better world. Each life lost was a story unfinished, a future cut short. But their sacrifices did not disappear into the silence of history. They echoed across generations, inspiring movements, struggles, and victories long after the war ended. Imagine the heartbreak of Black mothers and fathers who sent their sons to fight, knowing they might never return. Imagine the defiant courage of a man stepping onto the battlefield, knowing the world viewed him as less than human, but refusing to believe that lie. Imagine the resilience of women who bore the weight of labor, family, and grief, all while continuing to push forward in the hope that freedom might finally come. These individuals faced the sharpest edges of racism and oppression, even within the Union ranks. They fought not only against the Confederacy but also against prejudice and injustice within the very army they served. And yet, they pressed on. Their fight was not only for victory in war but for the vindication of their humanity. The contributions of Black Americans during the Civil War laid the foundation for profound social and political change. Their service on the battlefield and their defiance in the face of slavery forced the nation to confront the contradictions at its core. By the war's end, the question of slavery could no longer be ignored or postponed. The 13th Amendment abolished the institution that had scarred the nation for centuries, and the 14th and 15th Amendments sought to enshrine citizenship and voting rights for Black Americans. But these changes were only the beginning. The promise of equality remained far from fulfilled. Black Americans were met with fierce resistance, from the rise of Jim Crow laws to the terror of white supremacist violence. Yet their perseverance in the face of this adversity stands as one of the greatest testaments to human resilience. The Civil War may have ended, but for Black Americans, the battle for freedom and justice continued. Let's talk a little about legacy of courage. The courage of Black Americans during the Civil War did not die with them, it became their legacy. It is a legacy carried forward by the generations that followed, by the leaders who fought for civil rights, by the marchers who faced fire hoses and police dogs, and by every individual who has dared to challenge injustice. This legacy reminds us that freedom is not static. It is not something that, once gained, remains secure. It must be defended, expanded, and reimagined with each new generation. The sacrifices of Black Americans during the Civil War demand that we, too, fight for a world where equality is not a distant ideal but a lived reality. Let's also talk a little about the impact on the new generations. To remember their role in the Civil War is not simply to recall the past, it is to reckon with the present and envision the future. It is to honor those who dared to dream of freedom even when their chains told them it was impossible. It is to recognize that the fight for justice is unfinished and that the courage of those who came before us must inspire our actions today. The legacy of Black Americans in the Civil War is one of unyielding hope and boundless strength. It is a story of a people who refused to be broken, who stood tall in the face of unimaginable suffering, and who helped reshape a nation. It is a story of triumph over oppression, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit can rise, unstoppable and unbroken. And so, their story continues, not just in history books, but in every step we take toward a more just and equitable world. Their struggle, their sacrifice, and their courage are woven into the fabric of the nation they helped to save. It is our responsibility to carry that legacy forward, to ensure that the promise of freedom they fought for becomes a reality for all. In remembering them, we honor not only their sacrifices but also the vision of a better, freer, and fairer world that they dared to believe in. Their courage is our inheritance, their fight our unfinished mission. And so, their story becomes our own, urging us onward, ever onward, toward the brighter tomorrow they dreamed of and died for.